It is my plan and intention to continue to invest in American manufacturing, the work being done by American workers, upholding and lifting up good union jobs, which are good paying jobs, and doing the work of investing in American industries, including our industries of the future. That is the way we are going to win the competition with China for the 21st century.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris on her plans to keep the CHIP Act in place if elected president. That came after House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested that he would consider repealing the law under a Trump administration. He later walked back those comments, but the 2022 Act has emerged as another point of contention between the two parties, with just one day to go until the election. And any changes could have serious implications for the world's largest chip makers. Here to break it down, we've got our very own Akiko Fujita. Hey, Akiko.
Hey there, Maddie. Yeah, this is a law that was passed with bipartisan support 2 years ago, but Republican comments in the final days of this election cycle have raised questions about the future of the CHIPS Act. You mentioned the House Speaker's comments over the weekend, but that came after former President Trump made these comments in a conversation with Joe Rogan on his podcast a few weeks ago.
That chip deal is so bad. We put up billions of dollars for rich companies to come in and borrow the money and build chip companies here, and they're not going to give us the good companies anyway. All you had to do is charge them tariffs.
Well, the CHIPS Act has unlocked nearly $53 billion in funding over the last 2 years to bring semiconductor supply chains back to the U.S. That funding from the Commerce Department has led to new manufacturing sites or foundries and expansion projects. You see them on the map there across more than a dozen states. And investors have been following this closely because those commitments have come from some of the world's largest chip makers. We're talking about TSMC, Global Foundries, Samsung, Micron, and Texas Instruments. Intel has been the biggest beneficiary of this law, with the Commerce Department committing $8.5 billion in funding to build out factories across 4 states. The problem is only one company has received the funding to date because the other firms haven't met the milestones they negotiated with the federal government. The Commerce Department has not disclosed individual terms with each company, although we do know some of those milestones are tied to everything from CapEx to commercial contracts. The lack of those grants have started to weigh specifically on Intel, which has bet big on its future on the build out of its foundry business. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, speaking to Yahoo Finance, expressed his frustration about the timeline.
It's well over 2 years since the CHIPS Act passed. And over that period, I've invested $30 billion in U.S. manufacturing, and we've seen $0 from the CHIPS grants. This has taken too long. We need to get it finished. That said, we're working closely with the CHIPS office and constructively engaging with them to finish what we started.
Now, in addition to those grants, the CHIPS Act includes a 25% tax credit to those companies who are building out those supply chains. Gelsinger, quick to point out the tax piece there is roughly 3 times larger than the grants, as he says, and the companies received a big chunk of that. Now, the administration has touted this act as critical to national security, in part because of where chips are manufactured today. You see that just 14% come from the U.S., while 21% are manufactured in China, according to the Semiconductor Industry Association. And while Taiwan makes up 17% of that pie, when you look at overall chips, it manufactures nearly all advanced chips today. The CHIPS Act, part of that plan to try and change that dynamic, guys.
Yeah, Kiko, it's certainly going to be interesting just seeing what the outcome of the election is, and then, of course, the impact that it's going to have on the CHIPS Act. I'm curious because Speaker Johnson was quick to walk back some of his commentary. So I guess how realistic is an appeal versus maybe more so a revision here to what we know as the CHIPS Act?
Yeah, Sean, I've been talking to a number of analysts who cover the industry asking this very question. They say that they don't believe there is a full repeal of the act. Having said that, there could be a change in the implementation of the law, and that could still have significant implications here for those companies we just mentioned. All of this, of course, depends on the makeup of Congress. As we said at the beginning, this was a bipartisan bill. Some would say this is all just sort of politics leading up to Election Day, but any kind of delay or change in the implementation of this could have some big implications. Speaker Johnson talking about potentially streamlining environmental permitting reviews there, although a lot of these companies do get exemptions from those requirements as it stands.